You are.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. This is the June 16th meeting of the Chestnut Hill Commercial Area Study Community Advisory Group. Welcome to all of you. I want to introduce, first of all, Michael Rubenstein, who is joining us as the Select Board Liaison. I'm going to continue to chair, and Michael will be keeping the Select Board informed on a regular basis as to what we're doing. Michael, do you want to say a couple things?
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody, and thank you all for all the work that has been done thus far. For the last few weeks, I've been trying to dive in and talking to as many people as I can to understand what this opportunity is and all the great work that has been done. And I'm just looking forward to understanding more, throwing in my 2 cents and seeing if we can make something really exciting happen in this space.
Okay. So again, here we go. The other thing I want to mention right at the beginning is you would have all received an email from Meredith. And I'll just read the first couple sentences. Please note that earlier this week, City Realty notified the planning department of their intent to file a project eligibility letter, otherwise known as PEL, an application with the state for a residential 40B. That does not mean that they have a completed 40B application. They anticipate that it would take them 60 to 90 days to put one together, and they know that will probably be above the 10% subsidized housing inventory threshold by that time. But it's sort of a backstop for them. And we had, I think, a very useful meeting with City Realty last week.
Yes, last week.
Thursday, yes. Thursday that certainly where, as you can see, or as we go through the zoning proposal, which is the heart of this, the draft zoning proposal, draft with a capital D. They've seen some of that and seem to be in agreement that it's not a showstopper for them. I guess perhaps that's the best way to put it, without making any further commitments on their behalf. So let us. Yeah, go ahead.
Where are we in the Shy Index exactly? I know the Hancock Village kind of puts us on and off over the threshold. Do you know exactly where that stands?
I don't know what the exact number is, but I think the Hancock Village, they're anticipating will have their CO later this summer. And at that point, we'll be above 10%.
Is that likely to then change in the immediate? Do you know if those, because the new senior housing projects on Center Street, those should all be in the numerator and the denominator by now, correct?
I go back and double check with Kara. She's the authority on the SHI status.
Okay. So if not soon, they will be on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, thanks.
Okay, so what we're going to do this evening is go through draft zoning, and again, I emphasize draft with a capital D, but some good work has been done to explain how that might work, and we'll have a chance to take a look at that. We'll talk a little bit about where we go from here once as that draft gets fleshed out. I'm going to talk about or give you an update on the transportation study that's getting underway. Is that fair statement? Underway? And then we have kind of an interesting presentation on that Michael's going to go through comparing tall buildings, showing you some instances of buildings of fairly significant height, at least in Brookline terms, next to in the environment in which they exist, where the surrounding buildings are not at the same height. So let's start with draft zoning overlay map and go to work.
Sure. Thank you. And then also just to repeat from the chair's opening comments about the Pell application from City Realty, they were very clear that they're still invested in working with the town on the mixed use overlays zoning proposal. So they're not taking a step back from that. They're just creating some additional options for themselves. So, since we last met in late March, we have been moving forward with putting together the draft zoning, launching the transportation study. So tonight we're just gonna keep you in the loop about things that we've been thinking about and next steps. There was a great recommendation from Select Board Member Rubenstein that it would be helpful to have sort of a reminder about what we're working towards. So the Chestnut Hill Commercial Area Study, this is a summary in no particular order, just based on how I could get the words in this graphic. The key study components and deliverables that we have been kind of fleshing out over the past year or so. So to orient everyone, tonight our updates are going to be related to the zoning changes that we're working on proposing, as well as the infrastructure upgrades. But we will also be working on, over the summer, developing the design guidelines that will kind of speak directly to the zoning that we're proposing, and also including some recommendations regarding commercial area vibrancy enhancements. Examples of that would be unified branding, better wayfinding, streetscape beautification stuff. And then there could be additional policy and program recommendations. We haven't discussed this at this point in our advisory group discussions, but sort of a draft recommendation from the staff's perspective, given what we heard from community engagement and some of those other potential community vibrancy enhancements. I think we would recommend exploration of establishing a business improvement district in the area to help work in partnership with the town to really elevate the Chestnut Hill commercial area. So a business improvement district, we can get into that at a future meeting, but it's a district management entity that is initiated, funded, overseen by the property owners in the area. And it's a nonprofit organization that works in partnership with the municipality on public realm improvements in a business district. So more to come on that. But I also wanted to flag something that we have not discussed the community advisory group meetings, but if you're flipping through your agenda packets for tonight, you might have noticed in some of the EDAB subcommittee discussions, there was reference to MOAs and tax certainty agreements with property owners. So farther down the line, once the zoning is in more solid form, we will be working with the larger property owners in the study area to develop memorandums of agreement, MOAs, which will include tax certainty agreements. This is a very standard practice, and I think in anticipating, presenting a zoning proposal to town meeting is accustomed to weighing the zoning changes against the MOA and the tax certainty agreement, which is a package of benefits and protections for the town associated with the rezoning, and particularly if it's when we've done these types of rezoning efforts, they've been in response to a specific redevelopment project. So it's the zoning and then the MOA and the tax certainty, sort of the package of benefits, anticipating the redevelopment under the new zoning changes. We can get into more detail about that a little bit farther along and what we might want to include in an MOA with the larger property owners. But I did just want to put that out and fill in those gaps since EDAB, the subcommittee, had that discussion.
Meredith, can I
Yes.
just generally with the MOAs and the tax certainty agreements, is there any way for those to travel with the land?
Yes. So the MOA, the vehicle for the tax certainty agreement is that there's some sort of an easement exchange either from the developer to the property owner, and that's how it gets into the chain of title. Okay. And then, sorry, that is a great question though, David, because the purpose behind the tax certainty agreements is that if the property is rezoned, and if at some point later on it is used by or purchased by a nonprofit organization, tax certainty agreement states that even if it's owned by a tax exempt institution, the town would still receive the full extent of the property taxes through a payment in lieu of taxes agreement. And an example of why it's important for the town, or why the town has sort of adopted this practice of trying to secure these tax certainty agreements at any opportunity that it has, is 850 Boylston Street, which is Brigham and Women's Medical Offices. And there was several years ago a time when 850 was one of the top tax-paying properties in the town. It was purchased by Mass General Brigham, and it came off the tax rolls along with 2.5 million. So that's the cautionary tale and why we're trying to secure those for particularly these larger sites that we're talking about. Okay, so last time at our last meeting, we presented a draft rezoning framework. So it was very conceptual. We hadn't identified any numbers for the different zoning components. So this map looks very similar to what you were presented with back in late March, but there have been some changes. So I just wanted to flag those. The orange properties, so those go from the Newton line down to Holly Lane. We originally had presented those as potential planned unit development eligible areas. So a PUD, or in Boston, they're called planned development areas, PDAs. This would have been a new zoning tool for the town, sort of a new permitting process. And we thought that, given kind of what we've been grappling with in our conversations and reviewing City Realty's proposal, a PUD might be a helpful tool for us to add to the toolbox. However, after we've had 3 meetings with the EDAB subcommittee since we met in March, and after doing some additional research and in conversations with the EDAB subcommittee, we've set aside the idea of pursuing a PUD at this time. I don't think we have completely dismissed it, but I think for simplicity's sake and given some of the concerns that were raised in terms of introducing a new zoning tool and permitting process, and sort of are we adding unnecessary delays to the redevelopment of the Chestnut Hill commercial area with experimenting with this new tool. I think we're moving forward with developing a special district zoning overlay, which is the format that we've used for all of the rezoning we've done in your memory. So the revised map includes the orange area is the Chestnut Hill commercial subzone 4.0. The 4.0 references the 4.0 max FAR for the site. And then the other change, since you last saw this map of the study area, is this watermelon color. Is a new subzone, which is the Chestnut Hill commercial area subzone 3.0. So the 3.0's max FAR of 3.0. And this really emerged out of EDAB subcommittee discussions where there's the sense that there was greater redevelopment potential and greater interest, greater likelihood of interest in commercial development on this block north of Sheep Street. So we incorporated the 3.0 subzone. And if you'll notice, if you have the chance to flip through any of the materials, we don't have any zoning numbers or zoning framework for the transit-oriented mixed-use development subzone, which is in green, north of Boylston Street. And we've really been focused on for the past several weeks, these 3 subzones and how they fit together. So focusing on the transit-oriented mixed use is top priority for our work this summer. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts about the revised subzones proposed? Okay. I think the key question that we are confronting, given the study objectives of incentivizing significant net new commercial tax growth, and acknowledgement that this is a big economic development opportunity for the town, is, how are we going to ensure that we're going to make the best use of this economic development opportunity? And there, over past, several meetings, conversations with EDAB, Community Advisory Group, there was a sense of really trying to build in some mechanism for ensuring that we get an appropriate amount of commercial development through this rezoning effort. So where we have landed is establishing a minimum target for the amount of commercial square footage that would be included in a total in a redevelopment proposal. So that number, we're right now targeting 51%. So this would mean that if a developer came and wanted to utilize the overlay zoning, their proposal would need to include at a minimum 51% of the total square footage would have to be for commercial uses. And in terms of the allowed uses, I think we're still working on sort of a written out comprehensive list of what all of those uses would be. But it would be very broad and probably have a lot of similarities to what's currently allowed by right or special permit in the G districts. And one of the layers of the base zoning is a G 2.0. So we're still working on that, but the goal is to keep it very broad range of uses so that there's flexibility in the future as markets change.
So I wonder if I could interrupt just a second and say the 51% is perhaps a useful number to think about as a goal, but the key that we're looking for is a certain amount of revenue out of the redevelopment of this area. So if the revenue estimate from a particular proposal results in a high enough level of revenue, maybe that 51% is a little bit lower, or maybe it needs to be a little bit higher. But it's not a hard and fast number. It's sort of an indicator of where we think things need to be in order to get to a reasonable level of net new tax revenue.
With emphasis on the word net.
So we're going with 51% as sort of our placeholder commercial minimum target. And then, lots of conversations about the EDAB subcommittee about sort of entertaining the possibility that there might be a market cycle that would really lend itself to higher levels of commercial development. So in terms of providing additional incentives, that if a developer was in a position to exceed that 51%, we added bonus height and density for commercial use exceeding 60%. And we are exploring the concept of, as we are calculating what the commercial minimum target would be, about adding extra weight to certain uses that are really preferred. Certainly hotel, I think there's broad consensus that there's interest in having a hotel. This would be an appropriate location for that. And the extent to whether we would want to include extra weight to retail or medical office, for example, is something that we are going to keep thinking about and would like to bounce off the EDAB subcommittee about what would be an appropriate formula for calculating this commercial minimum target. So, as I mentioned, we've had several rounds of conversations with the EDAB subcommittee. We've received developers or large property owners have been at those EDAB subcommittee meetings, have provided additional feedback. We did have some formal written feedback from City Realty in response to the last EDAB subcommittee discussion on May 30th about what their thoughts were with that working draft zoning that we were talking about 2 weeks ago. So I think in speaking to Mike and Michael's comments about really prioritize, not losing sight of the objective of incentivizing net new commercial tax growth. And what we're really talking about is fiscal impact. And we're trying to sort of set a stake in the ground with identifying a target minimum amount of commercial development that we think would translate to the goals that we have of net new commercial tax growth. But I think we're trying to calibrate it appropriately where we're challenging developers to maximize the amount of commercial, but we're not setting people up so that they really just can't get anything to pencil out for, years or decades. So I did just want to say that in this discussion about what's an appropriate target for minimum amount of commercial, we have been having to confront sort of the realities about the limitations of commercial, the limitation of the demand for commercial uses in Brookline and sort of more broadly at this point in time. So these are just the next couple of slides are excerpts from RKG's market study that they did last year. Strong demand for multifamily. I think everyone here knows this, but just as a recap, office market, there's really not much of a opportunity for office development. Medical office, potentially, given our location and proximity to the LMA, but as we've talked about, and EDAB hosted a forum about sort of commercial market opportunities for Brookline, and there was a broker who specialized in medical office space, and there was a lot of discussion about all of the LMA institutions already have outposts in Chestnut Hill. Sort of a double-edged sword if you're looking at the example of Brigham and Women's about having a nonprofit organization, with occupying a large commercial building. And we are also hearing from some of the large property owners with existing medical office tenants that there's a lot of increased competition from the other side of Route 9 and stretches of 95. So there's potential, but it's iffy. And then hotel, we do feel like there is a market for hotel. The hotel concept that City Realty is proposing or has talked about being full service with conference facilities would be a unique product, but you can only have one hotel in the study area. So we just have to be mindful of that in calibrating what the commercial targets are for each of these subzones. And then retail, there is potentially some additional capacity for retail. And we've also been talking a bit about that capacity could grow if there's additional residential density added to the immediate area to support and keep the ground floor businesses active. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach. We have been working on putting numbers to paper and making some revisions and trying to talk more concretely about what we're trying to achieve and how zoning can help us achieve those things. So this is a work in progress. We really welcome feedback, public comment, and I'm going to turn it over to Zach to talk about kind of where we're at in terms of numbers.
Thank you, Meredith. So some quick vocabulary to get us started here. When we're talking about a setback, and apologies for those on Zoom, I'm going to be pointing at the screen. When we talk about a setback, that's an area where you can't have any building at all, versus a step back talks about an area beyond a setback where you can have buildings, but only up to a certain maximum height. So we've kind of looked at the various geometries of each block, thinking a lot about what we've heard from some of the developers that we've been working with, and of course from the community advisory group, some of the different neighbors, and where some of these areas are more important to have some screening versus where we're going to prioritize trying to concentrate some of the massing. So kind of going from west to east here, let's say, and from densest to kind of the lowest density, starting in this Chestnut Hill commercial 4.0, this orange area, coming back from the town line, which is kind of this red border that you see here. We first, along the municipal border and all the way down Heath Street, all the way across the study area, we're proposing a 15-foot setback. So that means that within 15 feet of the town line and within 15 feet of anywhere along Heath Street, you could only have open area. And again, these are just draft numbers that we have settled on for the moment for us all to discuss. And so taking from the municipal side, there's about 30 feet kind of on the Newton side. So that would leave a total of 45 feet basically between any existing structures and any theoretical new building. And then what this 100 is kind of saying is that we have this blue 15-foot setback, and then for another 85 feet until you get to this orange area, you could only build, and we've left these for the moment as ranges, you could only build in this area before the orange, but after the blue, up to 4 to 6 stories. So we haven't landed anywhere concrete yet, but that's kind of what we're thinking for now, versus all along Heath Street after this 15-foot kind of no build zone, I'll call it. There's another 60 foot of this kind of step back where you can only build to a maximum height, which we are for the moment thinking should probably fall. And again, it could be variable along Heath Street, but perhaps, around this end, somewhere closer to 7 stories and working down maybe to somewhere around 5 stories towards the eastern edge of Heath Street in the study area. Moving eastward a little bit to this red commercial zone in the middle, we're envisioning kind of a mild step down. Oh, sorry, just to kind of cap off. So I spoke about step backs and setbacks. And what that kind of leaves is these orange areas that try to concentrate both towards Boylston, towards Route 9, and towards Tully Street. And so within those orange blocks, with the incentive that Meredith was speaking about, even above 51% commercial, we're imagining you could build up to 14 stories without that incentive up to 12. So moving along to this red.
Before you go,
Sure.
You want,
sure.
make a comment about the orange?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the things, Zach, you might want to talk about is the impact of the FAR on that space.
Sure, yeah.
Just so people understand, the orange represents an area, not necessarily a three-dimensional building block.
Yeah, so certainly these kind of shaded areas do not represent like an area where a building is going to cover this site. That represents the only site where you could put a building up to the full height of the district. And basically what the FAR does is it will kind of cap the total buildable area, break up the massing. The developers will need to,
Sorry.
it's okay, have open space and circulation on these sites. So this certainly doesn't represent that there will be, a building covering this whole area, far from it. What this orange just says is that this is the area where you would be allowed to go up to the maximum that's being proposed without being mitigated by any sort of like setbacks or stepbacks. Does that help clarify? So moving on to this red area, which we're also imagining as more of a commercially focused zone, just particularly given the frontage along Boylston Street, but also given that we'll be kind of abutting these neighborhood mixed use subzones a bit more directly, wanting to kind of step down the height a bit. So the maximum with the incentive would be 12 stories, which is kind of the lower without the incentive here. And then normal without that incentive would be 10 stories. Using a 50-foot, there wouldn't be any actual setbacks aside from a 5-foot kind of boundary around basically extending from the sidewalks. But what this says is that within 50 feet of Holly Lane, within 30 feet of Sheaf Street, and within 50 feet of Hammond Street, you could only build up to 7 stories. So that's kind of what we're thinking for this Chestnut Hill Commercial 3.0 zone. It's a bit of like a scaled down version of what we're thinking for this 4.0. And then kind of coming to this last zone for which we have some draft dimensional requirements laid out, is this purple neighborhood mixed use zone that we're imagining almost more of like a Harvard Street type scale with hopefully a very active kind of commercially oriented ground floor and more residential above, with an incentive that we're still working out whether should be tied more to commercial or towards perhaps getting even more affordable housing in there than would otherwise be required. But perhaps without that incentive, the max height in these purple areas would be 6 stories with an incentive going up to 7 stories, and with a 20-foot step back from Dunster Road, within which you could only build, I believe, 6 stories. And then that leaves this transit-oriented mixed-use subzone, which, as Meredith alluded to, we haven't given as much attention to yet. We've wanted to kind of put more focus into seeing how these subzones to the south side of Boylston Street will kind of work and fit together. So that's our progress on these draft dimensions.
Just point out where on the area south of Sheath and west of Hammond, the parcels that are under control and part of the 40B filing.
On this block, you're saying? Yeah. So I believe the 40B on this red block on.
No, it's not.
No, it's on the purple.
Yeah, that I think that's kind of more towards the eastern side towards Hammond Street.
Yeah,
I think
it takes out the first. It
takes out several
first 3
parcels. Yeah, to
If you go back to the previous slide,
east.
to be clear. The previous slide, without the,
Yeah, we don't have the property owners, do we?
there we go, that previous slide, sorry. It's
Yeah,
the,
so I think here's
group right there.
there's 140B here, and then there's another kind of around here on this western side of the 3.0 zone.
There's also one at the corner of Hammond and Boylston Street. It's the one that's.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that's under construction.
No, I was just talking, because if you go to your setback diagram, the tail of that buildable area looks pretty unworkable, but it's actually sort of irrelevant, assuming that 40B is going forward, correct?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason some of these geometries, particularly trying to leave some developable areas here, and we get kind of narrow, but particularly given the 40B and the permit that is already exists for that site, I think it's less relevant.
Yeah.
And there's something else that occurs to me that we should, I think we've all heard this before, but it's probably worth mentioning again. The reason that 7 stories is a maximum for a certain type of construction. For the podium construction at this point,
2 over
double
5,
podium,
5 over 2.
pardon?
5 over 2.
5 over 2, thank you.
Pick on 5.
And once you go to 8, it becomes, you need a different type of construction. The costs go up very substantially, so you have to get to somewhere between 10 and 12 in order for the next step, the next level, to be economically viable. And so that's what
Yeah, that's why you kind of
That's
don't
the
see much
limitation.
between
That-
8 and 11.
right. So that's why it's unlikely that anybody's gonna build an 8-story building there. They would build either a 7 or perhaps a 10. If it's in an allowed area.
So any questions or comments on that?
I'm not sure how viable 7 is in 70 feet.
Speak up, Dave.
Right, I just said, I'm not sure anybody can quite fit 7 stories into 70 feet. It's more likely.
No, I think for 7, we were calculating 88.
Oh, yeah, all right, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the statutory limit's 85 to have occupancy. That if you look at is it 108 or 109 Center Street? It's under construction.
108, I think.
108. Anyways, that's like literally, I think 79, 80 feet in terms of its height. That's 5 over 2 construction.
Right.
And it's actually, it's a high-rise building meeting and mechanical, electrical, plumbing system, elevator, all that stuff requirements, but it allows for wood, basically wood type materials
construction above, yeah.
from 2 and to 7.
I have a question.
Yeah,
The
please.
neighborhood mixed use that purple there,
Uh-huh.
that includes already some commercial and it includes significant affordable housing. Block, so to speak. So my question to you is that up for sale? It's like, what's in that process?
In terms of the parcels themselves,
Mhm.
is that your question?
Kind of like they don't have for sale signs. So
Yeah, no, I mean,
happening.
I think that particularly in this purple, the neighborhood mixed use subzone, we're certainly anticipating less redevelopment and a slower pace of redevelopment. It's, foreseeable over the next handful of decades, this zoning could be on the books a long time.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like, who's to say, what's going to happen on Route 9 in 30 years.
Okay.
So I
The
think
idea is
it's,
to change the zoning now in anticipation of what could happen later.
yeah, I think in terms of this neighborhood mixed use zone, it's more about almost the level of preparedness
Mhm.
and trying to really allow for almost at the same scale of what's happening now, but really trying to encourage like this mixed use type of development
Mhm.
rather than purely residential, something with a more active ground floor.
I just want to reiterate the nature of an overlay, that it doesn't make the old zoning go away. It's an
Okay.
option.
Got it.
If
Thank
if you build 51% commercial on your property, you can opt to use the overlay. Otherwise, you can always just use the zoning that's there today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
all of what we're showing here would leave all of the existing zoning intact. This would just kind of layer on more options and more flexibility, and more flexibility too for the town to really incentivize the kind of development that we want to see in this area.
And I do think the 51 minimum commercial, we were thinking for the commercial subzones.
Yeah,
We
for
hadn't
the,
included that in the neighborhood and we haven't thought deeply enough about the transit oriented.
So I have another question. I know RKJ looked at this and gave some feedback on the commercial versus housing, whatever. Did they give a percentage of what commercial they thought we should target Or is it 51? We're just coming up with 51. But we could go higher, we could go lower. Fortunately, I'm hoping higher, but I'm just wondering, did they give an opinion on percentage?
So I was looking back, we did do, they did not give a recommendation on this is the minimum amount of commercial you should target. We had them do an exercise back in December, where they had given some thoughts about, the correlation between density and commercial use and sort of the town's fiscal impact goals.
Mhm.
I think when you were saying that you're hoping the commercial percentage is a little bit higher,
For me personally, but yeah.
I think the concern is that, for focus on the fiscal impact, is ratcheting the commercial minimum required the best way to achieve that goal, or does it actually have an opposite effect where you developers really are telling us like they can't get stuff to pencil out. They're concerned about even the 51%.
Okay.
So
it's a developer issue, like what the developer is willing to do.
it's a financial feasibility issue.
Feasibility,
They
okay.
couldn't get a project to pencil out and be financed and
Okay.
constructed.
Right, which then becomes a net fiscal impact issue for the town.
Right. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
The problem is housing is too attractive as an investment and commercial is not attractive enough. So that's why, I mean, it'd be great if we could say, well, should all be, well, except for the people sitting in the orange blocks, should all be commercial, but that won't work.
To interrupt quickly, I think it would work if we were willing to wait forever, which we're not.
Well, yeah, so that's an interesting comment because, there was a discussion, I know, the subcommittee talked about, well, eventually. And
Right.
so in the long run, we're all dead, as one of the great economists said. And, some of us sooner than later. But in the meantime, you give up a stream of revenue that has considerable value over, 5, 10, 20-year periods. So it's appropriate to recognize what the circumstances are now and allow for enough residential to make the whole thing viable.
At one point, there was talk about like the amount of tax revenue, and I think it was around 9 million.
That was for the 20-story building on top, and we.
So do we have a number in mind here? I know there's a percentage,
Yeah.
but is there a number like?
Uh,
Go ahead.
Sure. So first of all, we're talking about net impact, net fiscal impact. So we're talking about property taxes coming in, and we're talking about the cost of town services going out. And RKG did some excellent work building a model that, that does a very good job of approximating what that would be, but not a perfect job. From my perspective, and talk to one other select board member about this. I think
Can't talk to more than one.
can't talk to more than one. But if we were able, for example, to get about $5 million net over the course of like the first 5 years of phase, and then maybe a total of 9, again, net, taking out, the town's costs and school costs and all that over the next 5 years, that's a sort of a 10-year development horizon. Then that combination, the town could do a lot with that money and could do a lot with that money over the years that follow that, as opposed to, as Zach said, we could wait forever for the. And then with that sort of constraint, we can then have conversations with the developers to figure out like what pencils out within that constraint. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Next slide, here we go.
And this is just a very quick update. So since we last met, the select board approved a contract for the first two phases of the transportation study. We're working with Kittleson and Associates, our transportation consultant. This is a summary of the goals of the transportation study that are going to inform those infrastructure improvement recommendations from an earlier slide. So the data collection has begun. So between now and the end of the summer, we're going to be working with the consultant to sort of do an assessment of the data that they collected. We did get some concerns feedback about the timing of the data collection. There were concerns that Beaver Country Day, those traffic counts would be incorporated into this existing conditions data collection. So we have talked through those concerns. We were aware of them, kind of reviewing game plan with our consultant and with our transportation engineering staff. And so there are lots of options that we have in terms of making sure that we can feel good about the traffic data that we collect. So we have some existing data that we can compare to as a contrast to sort of Route 9 to benchmark, you know, as a point of comparison. And then there are also standardized seasonal adjustment factors that we can apply to the data that come from the state or from our regional planning office. And then we are also in the fall, when school is back in session, we're going to do the Woodland Road count so that we can make sure that the Beaver Country Day traffic is appropriately reflected in that data that we land on for building out the traffic model. So I just wanted to reassure everyone about that. And I understand those concerns. So we are going to repeat some of those counts. In the fall, we're going to be transitioning to phase 2, which is where we're going to be working with Kittleson to identify, based on existing conditions, what they observe from their site visits, about, you know, where they think the safety improvements should be implemented. And then we'll hone in on those, and they'll sort of build out conceptual images, diagrams that we're going to be able to incorporate into our report. So I would expect the Kittleson will be making an appearance at a couple of community advisory group meetings in the fall for updates and feedback.
I have a quick question on that, sir.
Sure.
So Hammond Street's going through a road diet that's supposed to start in spring 26, which will change very much the street and make it more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And I'm just wondering, is that like, how are you going to incorporate that into this? Because I think it's going to change the way people use that street and access much of Route 9, really. So I'm just curious.
I mean, from the south or from
From the south.
From the south, up to, let me get my street right, up to Heath Street. So that will be, it will be one lane each way, but it will actually have pedestrian, bicycle friendly,
Yeah, separated.
separated. So it will be much safer in that area. It has not been safe. I mean, it'd be a little bit out of, well, I don't even say that because I think there's a certain person in this room that rides over there. But most of us would not ride our bike in that area.
Well, right, so having ridden a bike in that area, I would say, yeah.
That's about.
It survived. It's also that once you get to the rotary, what are you gonna do?
Right.
So it's like, but the bottom line is it will change, I think, the access of that road in a positive way. For many people who just don't feel comfortable walking and biking on that street. So it just, when we look at a traffic study, I mean, obviously Beaver Country Day being out of session right now for about a 2-week window impacts it, but I think the long range is that really impacts it, I think. So just wondering the consideration of that.
Our transportation engineering division definitely did flag those improvements for the consultant when we were doing the, we give them all of our data and all of the updates and things that they need to know. So it's definitely on their radar. So when we're developing the safety improvements, we can factor that in. So there won't be a duplication of efforts. And then phase 3 is contingent upon funding availability in the upcoming fiscal year. But if we are able to move forward with the future capacity land use scenarios, which is where we are going to try to pressure test the infrastructure against the amount of density that we're contemplating in the rezoning, we could build into whatever model the transportation consultants build based on the data collection from the existing conditions. We can make sure that they include assumptions in that model to reflect Hammond Street road diet, whatever benefits that might have.
Thank you.
Jane, is that going to take out a vehicle lane
2 vehicle lanes
on each side?
one on each side. That was approved a while ago.
Yeah.
When Chris Dempsey, I think, was still the chair of
Oh.
transportation, so it's been a while in the making, but it's, what I heard from Aaron was it will be 2026, spring 26.
Okay,
And this is the final slide. This is just an overview of next steps to give everyone a sense of where we're going as we sprint towards a spring 2026 town meeting for presenting the rezoning package. Over the summer, we're going to continue fleshing out this framework. So incorporating any feedback from the community advisory group, members of the public. I've already talked about a few things that we really want to run past the EDAP subcommittee, Ken and George. So we're going to be working on drafting the design guidelines over the summer, working with our transportation consultant as they're finishing phase 1, getting started on phase 2. And we'd like to reconvene the community advisory group at some point in late August, early September to sort of present progress that we've made. Hopefully we'll have a more comprehensive rezoning proposal at that point. We have also received the feedback and are working towards having some better visualizations to have people understand what this zoning envelope means. So we'll work on kind of putting that together and having those points of reference, although I think Michael has some other references with existing buildings for people to understand the heights and density that we're talking about. So in the fall, we're going to be looking to have a working draft zoning. And what I think, given the fact that we have City Realty and growth companies, 2 of the large property owners who we know have near-term redevelopment interests, I think it makes sense to invite them back in to sort of do a demonstration of, based on the zoning that you're talking about right now with your working draft zoning, here's what we would do within that. And I think being able to see those presentations and be able to, visualize and have a better understanding of what the zoning would translate to in terms of buildings, look and feel of a place, that would be a helpful exercise to go through, refine the zoning, and then towards the end of the fall, finalizing our vision for the infrastructure improvements that we would include for those study recommendations. In the winter, we finalize all of our study recommendation, and then we would go on a tour to all the different land use boards in town, gathering input, and then ultimately present to the select board our final study recommendations for them to consider adopting and getting direction on whether or not we're going to be advancing a rezoning proposal to town meeting. So depending on how sturdy the rezoning proposal is at that point, we would also be working on finalizing the MOA and the tax certainty agreements, because all of that is bundled together and included in the rezoning package that we would send to town meeting for spring 2026.
Do you have the CAD software that you could use to create three-dimensional images of the different potential envelopes?
So we
did that basically in GIS. We're not sure that that way of visualization is going to be most helpful.
What they have is not what you're thinking of.
Okay, now I'm talking about views from Route 9, from Heath Street, that kind of thing, where you're actually showing the boxes in three-dimensional.
But the envelope doesn't define the boxes, because then you have to.
No,
Subtract
but
to get to the
you have to
FAR.
put it within this.
Within the box,
within
but
the
it's
box.
not, right, but again, this issue of it's a massive box, but the FAR limits, and plus floor plates and windows.
The massive box is not good at conveying what type of building could actually maybe go there.
Well, I think they have definitive uses to define what the boundaries are, just like when we had the sky plane, that was a line, and that people could see that you could work underneath. And so these are the same kind of things. These are basically touchstones and boundaries that you would have to work within. It's an envelope of potential building area.
Yeah.
Anyways,
You also, your setbacks, not step backs, but your setbacks, well, step backs potentially too. You haven't talked about interior lot lines, just about the perimeter of this site.
Certainly. We've only gotten to kind of saying that between buildings on a site, there should be not from each building, but a total setback of 30 to 40 feet between buildings. But that's kind of as far as we've gotten on that point, and you're absolutely correct.
And that also depends on height, because obviously some of the lots in the neighborhood zone are only that wide or whatever, the smaller lots.
Yeah, as you move down east of the
The poly,
between Holly and Tully, is not owned, but it's not a single owner even at this point. So that would be broken up by, to some extent, by differences in ownership. The largest single property owner there is the Grove Companies.
Is what, I'm sorry, this that,
Grove Companies, the building that, the medical office building.
oh, that
and
one,
the
okay,
FedEx building.
okay.
All right, so, we do have some part way to answering the question that you're sort of implicitly asking, Ken, is, well, what do things look like when they're built? And so, Michael, do you want to take some of that?
So basically, and I have to give Janice Kahn, some a shout out here, who was talking about sort of walking around and looking at different buildings to sort of get a feel for them, in a particular context, and sort of have a sense of how different heights, different positionings on a block, against different widths of streets, affect sort of what feels reasonable or appropriate for that context, and whether those various contexts translate reasonably into the Chestnut Hill commercial area. So this is a look at, maybe a dozen or so different areas, both in Brookline and a few at the end in Boston. So let me just start here. Catch up.
Sharing?
I am sharing, and
Yeah, you must be sharing, of course. There you go. Sometimes that,
let me just 1 second.
what I find is just make that middle stone as big as you can.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is we're looking into Brookline Place. And the building in front of us is one Brookline Place, and the building on the right is the 5 or 6, depending on where you are, the garage that is along Pearl Street. And behind, you can see in the distance the Hilton Garden Inn, which I believe is 10 stories plus mechanical on top of it. I just thought that this was an interesting perspective across the street from looking at a group of buildings of various heights. And you can also foresee the shorter building in the front. But from different perspectives, you can, they look similar in heights, they look different depending on the distance.
So the 4-story apartment says Village Way, I believe.
Village Way is actually behind us. But I think part of it is the thing on the front. Okay. And then what we have here is inside of 2 Brookline Place, between 2 Brookline Place and the garage. This just gives you a sense between buildings of promenade that has one particular kind of outside treatment between those spaces. Again, different ideas. Okay, and this again is a picture of the garage, just to give you a sense of the mass, because one possibility is that this is the kind of mass that could come either up against the Tully Street side or against the western border, or wherever structured parking might appear on site. Okay, so I took a took a ride on the Sea Line down Beacon Street, and tried to capture some pictures of as many, tall buildings as I could. So this one starts at 1101 Beacon Street, which is a medical building that's about 8 stories tall. And one of the interesting details about this one, which you can see on the picture on the left, this is from Google Maps, or some mapping application, is the interplay between the medical building, which is on the right, and a multifamily. It's a 4-unit building on the left, and you can see there's actually relatively little space between those two. And the medical building, of course, goes up all the 8 stories. Because the house, of course, is south of the building, most of the shadow casting is that you can see on the house is actually from tree cover around the house, and less so from the building, from the medical building. This is 1180 Beacon Street, which is sort of interesting. It's about an 8-story tall building on a corner. It has a ground level parking behind it. And if you look on maps, there are some townhouses on Parkland Street that sort of come up against that parking lot, and the building on the backside. This is 159 St. Paul Street, another example of a 9-story building that is relatively close, just across an alleyway, to a 4-story building. So you can sort of get a sense of this, how the heights step down from, well, this is on Beacon Street, but the address is St. Paul. Okay. This is 1371 Beacon Street, 13-story high building. That is a mixed-use building. So when we're talking about mixed use, commercial and residential on top, this is an example. There's a small plaza to the east side of this, to the corner of Webster and Beacon Street. And behind this is 125 Park Street on the other side, which is a 3-story apartment building. Again, heading down Beacon Street, this is 1731, 14 stories, but this is an interesting example because it has a 5-story building that then steps back. So when we think about the different heights that Zach talked about earlier, this is an example of how those heights could play out. Obviously, cement and a style of a particular era, not necessarily what we see current, but it does give you a sense of the mass. And then behind that are the townhouses in Regent Circle. This was another sort of interesting example of a different style of an 8 or 9-story building on Beacon Street, 1856 Beacon. The interesting thing about this, of course, is this is a building that is relatively narrow facing the street, whether it is facing Keith Street or Boylston Street, if a building in this orientation would appear in the commercial study area. So it gives you a different perspective of different orientations of buildings.
Not an example of desired fenestration.
I'm sorry, no, definitely not. But you know, when
You want windows in your apartment?
One or
But the interesting thing, of course, is that when people who live here think about where's the front of the building, they don't think of this side, right? The front of the building is, I think, to the, as we're looking at it, to the right.
Ingold, yeah.
Yeah, and then the back is to the left because the depth of the building extends in that direction. So the next few are in Boston. This is a new building. It's like, it was just finished right before the marathon. It's the corner of Arlington and Boylston Street.
This is where Shreve's used to be.
Where Shreve Pump and Low used to be, but it extends that whole block. It is a 9-story building that you can see the top two floors are stepped back, and when people talk, for example, about a 15-foot height for the first floor and then shorter heights above, that's what this building has also. Interestingly, this building, as I was walking there, I measured it from the building to the curb is 15 feet. And you know, it's just a wide boulevard. And they have retail on the first floor and office space above, and I think parking from a side entrance that goes underground. This is an 8-story office with residential, 9 stories, office residential above. It's on the corner of Comm Ave and Berkeley Street. There's a 7-story building on the other side of it. Just another example of, you know, multiple uses, different articulation. But again, right up against the street. And this is what it looks like across Berkeley Street. And the last example, so this is 16 stories. This is the Taj Hotel and condos. So as you know, as discussions have existed about hotels and condos, certainly on the high end, this is looking across Arlington Street from the Boston Garden. And again, you know, it obviously has a tall first floor and different articulation for the various uses. That's good. So just looking around and seeing types of buildings to give everyone a sense of, like, you know, what does 16 stories feel like? What does 8 stories or 12 stories or 14 feel like?
And what is 16 stories next to him, or 13 or 14 stories next to 4 stories feel like?
Yeah.
Since the other concern.
Yeah.
All right.
Questions?
I'm not sure.
I just think the comment that David, you should probably land this better than I, but the idea of the lower level of the building being so critical in terms of housing experiences. And I think that's something that we've talked about. I know that perhaps it's also in thinking in terms of step backs and other things, but that's really a critical factor.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna take this in 2 parts. We have community advisory group discussion on this scheduled, and then we'll take public comment. We don't have a huge number of people online, but so what I'm gonna do is one from column A, one from column B, and give everybody who wants to speak an opportunity. We have 1 person signed up in advance, is that correct? And then we got some more.
Kathy's on, she's online.
Okay, yeah.
And then, so Kathy's online.
Okay, that's great. David, Jane? And comments, questions?
I think I've been asking mine as I go, so I don't have any right now.
Okay.
So I would make a couple 3 comments. I want to make the case that we should strongly consider the hotel incentive as an additional weight. We can put some numbers behind that, but basically the hotel occupancy excise tax could add about 50% more revenue than on top of the property tax revenue itself. So that's something that we should give serious thought to. I know City Realty also proposed a similar incentive for lab space, and why not put that in the formula? Although I wouldn't hold my breath unless you want to wait for it. The second thing, I saw where you put maximum parking ratios in the draft chart, and I want to speak out against that. I think maximum is substituting town planning staff, town meetings opinion on what the market should be, as opposed to what the market necessarily demands. I don't think developers build excess parking. It's very expensive. They build what the parking they feel is needed to lease or sell the space. And I would be very careful about trying to do that relative to demands for parking that might be not fully understood relative to meeting space and or larger condos. And this is a suburban location. So I think we have to accept that it's going to be different than Harvard Harvard Street and Washington Street in Brookline Village. And then I just,
Quick question on that, Ken. Are you advocating that we switch back to a minimum instead, or are you saying we should just leave parking more like to the market?
no, I would set a minimum person.
Okay.
And then I had a question about step X. Had you defined what the depth of that would be?
I'm sorry, when you say depth, like,
Step X.
so that's what the diagram,
It's 100 feet from the property.
On the west and 75 feet.
Yeah,
No, but so.
Yeah, it's like the zone along Heath Street is only 7 stories and then 5 or 4 here. And then it can go up to the full amount once it's stepped back.
Right,
are you asking about the step back height?
yeah, the depth and stuff,
The depth or the height of the step back?
the height.
So I have that here, I can just give it to you.
Okay, thanks.
It's a little small. But this basically. Let's still do it.
Thanks.
Yeah, we've kind of left them as ranges for now, kind of for further discussion. But generally with the principle of stepping down as we get to the sidewalk and as we go east.
is that something you're comfortable or can put up at this point, or is that something that's?
Sure, it's
In the works?
just a chart with all numbers. I believe it's in the packet.
Yeah.
So it's certainly been published.
Okay.
It's just a little hard to like read.
All right. Okay, so you can, David, any comment?
Not really. I mean, I appreciate the basic use, or mass zoning in that you guys are bringing forward after all this time of the colors, it makes sense. I really appreciate the fact that we've circled back to a proposal that overlays for the whole study area, which we veered away from for a long period of time. And I think that for this to work, it sounds a lot like a piece of it is still like Waldo Durgan, where ultimately also it's kind of baked with the developer for any major kind of proposal. I think that's the trickiest part, is that we're trying to do a sort of a timeless overlay that's going to work across these various areas and be good for the duration, but with these I guess I'm a little unclear about the agreements that go along with it. And are they just built into the zoning that they have to be put in place? Or are they with developers, with landowners?
They would be negotiated with the landowners, and finalized ahead of town meeting, considering the rezoning package, and then they would be executed after the town meeting vote.
But that would apply to any to a certain subset of landowners who actually wanted to do something, but would they also then be baked in for every other landowner who
I
hadn't
think-
proposed something
I
yet?
think it's for those uniquely large sites within the study area.
Right. So there's a lot of work yet to be done to actually see something that can be evaluated for its all of its impacts, both beneficial and
And cost, right.
and costs and change and
Absolutely.
heights and shadow studies and green space, open space, pedestrian space, amenities,
All of that,
all of this, yeah.
all of that will be done by next week.
Next week, great. No, that's why I don't have a lot of comment at this
Right.
point. I think this is a good framework.
Yeah.
And let's see what we can bring forward for everybody to really sink their teeth into.
Okay.
I kind of agree with that. That's why I don't think I have more. You totally agree with the hotel, and I would love to see this area be the commercial vibrant area that it could be. But not knowing where we're going from here, it's really hard to say much more than that, so.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so let's take public comment. I have 5 people,
Oh, I do have a very narrow question about, because I think this came up, but about how parking in its various forms is counted or not counted in FAR.
It's not.
Ever.
I believe that a parking garage in Brookline's code is not ever counted in FAR. You'd have to ask our regulatory colleagues, but to my knowledge.
that's my understanding as well.
Okay.
You have a small area inside, the Coolidge corner that it's,
Okay. Not in Chestnut Hill.
pardon me?
But not in
Chestnut Hill.
Chestnut.
No, not, it's
Okay.
like I said.
All right, so it's more a question of just finding a place for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it certainly impacts the height. It won't impact the FAR, but you can't build any
It
higher
has to-
because. you're on
Right, has
top
to
of it.
fit within the allowable outlet.
Yeah.
So you can't build a 20-story parking garage right now.
Also, it wouldn't be very practical.
No. A lot of rents. All right, so I have 5 people signed up. If you're online and you want to speak and you're not, and you haven't already, let us know. Please just use the hand raise. So Alice, and I know Alice is online, and so is Katha. So let's start with Katha.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. My name is Katha Seidman. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 2, a member of the Brookline Arts Commission, and a board member of Brookline for Everyone. Tonight, I am speaking for the Board of Brookline for Everyone. A longer version of my remarks tonight has been sent to the committee. Brookline for Everyone is a grassroots group of residents who want Brookline to be economically thriving, racially inclusive, and environmentally sustainable. We believe these goals require a substantial increase in housing, commercial development, and especially mixed-use development. While thoughtful planning is essential, delays can come at a significant cost. That is why we are deeply concerned by the recent Brookline.News article entitled Route 9 Commercial Development Project Stalls, Delaying Town's Tax Revenue Hopes. The Chestnut Hill West area, prioritized for rezoning decades ago in the 2005 Comprehensive Plan, remains the largest and most promising commercial site in Brookline. It holds enormous potential for generating development that includes a mix of commercial uses as well as housing at all price points. We strongly support the town's ongoing planning study led by the Economic Development Division, which aims to bring forward zoning recommendations to the Select Board ahead of the spring 2026 town meeting. While B4E supports efforts to maximize revenue-generating commercial development, we also recognize the challenges facing certain asset types, especially traditional office space. If zoning demands more commercial use than the market can support, the result can be no development at all, an outcome that would forfeit substantial new tax revenue. City Realty has expressed willingness to build a mixed-use project that includes a hotel, as we've said here tonight, a strong tax generator, along with retail, medical office, and various forms of housing. Such a mix is essential for financial feasibility. The new development could increase tax revenue to around $8 million annually, compared to just over $1 million today. After accounting for tax service costs, the net fiscal benefit is likely around $4 million per year, making it the most significant single economic development opportunity Brookline has seen to date. And this figure does not even include the rest of the Chestnut Hill West study area. It is both symbolically and practically urgent to rezone the entire Chestnut Hill West area, including the City Realty site. The town cannot afford further delays. And with the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee continuing its work, failing to act now risks not just this project, but also continued stagnation across other neglected commercial areas. If Brookline is to fund essential services without repeated overrides, it must embrace the kind of smart, tax-positive growth this project represents. Thank you for considering our comments.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for being within 3 minutes without my even mentioning that. That's what I would like people to stick with it. Thanks. Susan Des?
I guess I'm just gonna say something that we've talked about before. I'm not gonna comment on Candace. Thinks that, why our neighborhood should bear the brunt of years of neglect in Brookline, dealing with the revenue issue and many others. As much as I appreciate looking at all of the buildings that we saw tonight and how they are next to other smaller buildings, none of those buildings were shown next to a residential neighborhood. Our houses, my house is 1 story high. Most of the houses in the neighborhood are 2 stories. So when you're talking about 7, 8, 10, 12-story buildings next to 2 stories, that's really not what we looked at, 10 minutes ago. I just hope that the neighbors, as I've said before, as all of us have said, we're concerned about height. It's a very important factor for us. We're concerned about height and traffic.
Okay. Thank you. Joe?
Thank you. My remarks are mostly sort of a rebuttal to Mr. Rubenstein's comments and the graphics that he put up there. I don't know the genesis of 1101 or 1180 Beacon Street, but they're very old, and I'm sure zoning was much different then. And I don't even know if they came, if the chicken came before the egg, as far as the house next door or whatever. But those buildings are almost opposite each other. They have a boulevard with train tracks, and then another boulevard for frontage. We have Heath Street, which has got to be one of the skinniest streets in town. And then when he showed the Brookline Ave and Washington Street, the hotel property and that stuff down there, those are 2 giant streets that come together. That used to be a humongous rotary, and they made it into a T-type intersection. And the Brook House is not built up to the sidewalk. The Brook House is set way back. So when you're standing in any part of that area and you can see all 3 of those buildings, it's a long stretch to get from one building to the other. Again, on Heath Street, if you have the wall of the cemetery at your back, you can almost reach out and touch what would be allowed on this city realty property. And also for the parking garage, that fronts a street that has no buildings on the other side. Then it's got some train tracks. Then there's another street that has no building on this train track side, and it's got the puppet showcase and those other properties on the far side of Station Street. So all of those examples show tall buildings or big buildings that have plenty of space around them. And the space that we're interested in is the Heath Street side of the property, not the Route 9 side of the property. I mean, he can say, well, you can stand over at Legal Seafoods and it seems like these buildings are a mile away, but that's not where we live. This is where we live, a skinny little street, one of the skinniest and oldest streets in Brookline, and we can't back up and take in all of the view. And I don't know, the building where next to the Star Market, 1731 Beacon, I forget what was there before. It might have been a huge hotel, but I'm not positive. I know somebody in this building has to know, or I know Carla knows what was there, but I don't think she's online. But that might have been built by right at the time. I don't know if it was or it wasn't. And that 1856 Beacon Street, with all due respect, it's one of the homeliest buildings in the whole wide world. And I don't know, I can't imagine that anybody who lived there then and is still living there now has gotten used to looking at it. And I don't know if anybody who's looking for a house that drove by that said, gee, I wish something around here would be for sale, because I'd love to look out my window and see that thing. But there's nothing attractive about gigantic buildings on what is now a small, low scale office park. And I thought, I went to the EDAB meeting on May 30th, and Zach's presentation was online, and it was hard to follow online. And I left with the impression that the next time we met, but maybe it was the next time the EDAB meets, there was going to be some three-dimensional graphics that would show what could go on that parcel, and I didn't see them tonight. And these big orange areas, I'm glad that there was some explanation that you can't cover that whole area with one gigantic 4-story building. But I would have liked to have seen a graphic demonstration of what might be permitted there, you know, and what the spacing would be between the buildings that are on that orange plot, and I didn't see it.
That's what Ken was getting at when he asked about, do we have some software to illustrate that? And, I guess that, the answer is probably the next way, the best way to get at that is to go further with the zoning draft, and then give it to the developers and see what they come back with, because they're the ones who are gonna have to decide what building goes where. And they'll come back with something that will certainly be three-dimensional for us to look at. But it is certainly, and one of the things we talked about before when we were looking at these slides, it's scary to look at that big orange block and think, oh my God, that could be 12 stories all, you know, the whole. It's not like that. But you're absolutely right that we have to provide some visuals so that you can get a sense of, well, what would it be like?
Yes.
Absolutely accept that.
Okay, can I ask one more question, please? Who pays for the infrastructure enhancements? That was part of that circular puzzle that.
The answer is that's a subject of negotiation and typical development.
Okay.
Blair Hines.
Thank you. Well, for the record, Blair Hines, I'm a resident, about 400 yards from the west edge of the study area. And
Speak up if you.
okay, I'll try to be louder.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I did appreciate very much the kind of framework that was coming up about a setback and then a step back. I think that is the direction to go with overlay. I think that the setback of any new building, I think, should be conforming to how Brookline typically does development between two different zones. And I think that the T5 is a 30-foot rear yard. There should be a 30-foot setback along that west boundary. I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is I think that step back was a really good conceptual idea, because I think what it really does and should do is it should provide some kind of modulating height of a building between the residential neighborhood and taller buildings that would be located further into the site along Route 9. So I think that's the right approach. I think there's going to be pushback about how high that, you know, next order of business building should be along the west side and along Heath Street. I know the neighborhood would be thinking much lower height than what you're showing. And I think this brings in the big picture of how high should buildings be. Having gone through at the planning board a lot of discussion so forth around the Harvard Street rezoning, the planning board, I want to mention, thought it should be higher than it is, and it's I believe it's 5 stories all along there. I think that represents, you know, I think a fairly low scale that was pretty much in keeping with a fairly urban area of Brookline, with the exception of these occasional large towers that were built long ago. I think that the scale of this should be somewhere between you know, like the area along Harvard Street zoning and what is being proposed here, which I think is, you know, just stands up taller than anything in the area. So I think you're going to get a lot of pushback from the neighborhood around looking at 12 stories in this area, and that just isn't just the Chestnut, the city real estate property, but also growth property. That being said, I do look forward to this being redeveloped. So I'm not in any way opposed to the housing. I'm not in any way opposed to increasing the height that's allowed there, which currently is 50 and 60 feet. I just think this needs to be a little more whittled down as the process moves forward. Thank you.
Okay. Here. Last person who signed up is Al Raines. Al is online. Mark, I invite you on the list, but I'll come back to you as soon as Al's spoken. Al is online.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much, Mike. My name is Al Rain. I live at 15 Linden Street in the Village. For the record, I'm on the board of Brookline for Everyone. And of course, I endorse the comments that Catherine read before and the written comments that we've submitted. I'm also on EDAB and on the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. And with respect to those two town organizations, I'm speaking strictly for myself. Chestnut Hill's a unique opportunity in Brookline, and practically everybody in this discussion has said that because it's true. And it's a unique opportunity, because of its scale and because of how it sits in the town, not just from the standpoint of planning and approving a project, but really at the comp plan level. This is that kind of potential impact and potential benefit. I personally think it's a place where mixed use development and substantial density are both possible and appropriate. And as we all know, when we say mixed use, we mean both commercial development and multifamily housing. And it's not just that the study area is big enough that there's room for both, and it's not an either or choice, and certainly it's not. But it's more than that. It's that those two things, multifamily housing and commercial development and the public realm that glues them together, they work best when they are together. And whether from an economic development standpoint or a transportation standpoint, or a placemaking standpoint, having a substantial amount of commercial development and multifamily housing on a essentially a blank slate of this scale is what I think both the market wants and that we as citizens of the town would want as well. We know the town needs the revenue, and there's a sense of urgency, I think, and that it's important to gain momentum in this process and keep that momentum. And we need the revenue and we need the credibility that something big and complicated like this can begin to happen in town. And I say begin because this isn't going to happen overnight. The process certainly won't end with a new zoning framework, but the process will begin with a new zoning framework. And I want to very strongly endorse the work that the staff has done and is continuing to do on a zoning framework, both on the vision and on the details. I like what I've heard, and I also want to compliment them for the attention they're paying to the need for a tax certainty framework, which is at the heart of getting the revenue that we need out of this development for the long term. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Martha Yurchak, member of the neighborhood, in this case. 2 points. I want to reinforce Susan's comment on the fact that the problems and missteps and missed opportunities of past commercial development attempts in Brookline should not all land on this development. I get the pressure, I get the need, and we are living with our history. So it can't all be fixed by the size of the buildings in this development. That being said, I think it's important to echo what Blair and others have said in terms of our interest in working with the planning department to move this forward. And at the same time, it feels, after having attended meetings for a year, like it's hard to be heard. And I think while I appreciate the work that's been done, I think it's still, the setbacks aren't quite enough. The step ups aren't quite enough, and the density seems too much. That may change when we see models, but it still looks too big and too massive for that area, considering what is around it and what the neighborhood is. Thank you.
The one thing I would encourage you to do is keep coming and keep reminding us. I will say also that there are a number of things that were brought forward by neighbors that in fact have been incorporated in this. For example, there's no traffic coming out of the Heath Street in anybody's mind.
We definitely agree.
And there are now the discussion about setback, not is there a setback, but how much? And the same is true of step back. So keep talking.
We are making progress.
Well, we'll get there. Right.
Thank you.
Right. And thank you. Okay. Last call, as the beer vendors say at the end of the 7th inning in Fenway Park.
And there is a microbrewery, proposed as a permitted use, so we can.
Microbrewery is proposed as permanent use. Oh, yeah.
we get those.
Well, look forward to that.
Yeah.
That should be at the top story. All right, thank you all very much. We'll see you later.
Got a good plan for the summer?